here is going to die? Yeah? Is anyone here immune to death? Please tell me your secret so I can also experience this immunity. Everyone dies, right? Everyone experiences death. Death is something that comes for us all. And there is some mystery to it, right? At least for some people. For us, we know the answers, right? Do we? Or yeah? Okay, so then I guess this will be a refresher course for you guys. And we will resolve this mystery of death. Um, there was a king, his name is Philip. I don't know if you know him. He's Philip of Macedon. He's the king of Macedon. You might be more familiar with his son Alexander. Alexander the Great. Um, Philip also did other things as well. He was a pretty good king. Well, I don't. He was a successful king, but he had a slave. I'm sure lots of rulers did at the time. He had a slave, and to the slave he gave a standing order. So this is an order that the slave had to carry out, right? Every morning of the king's life, no matter what the king was doing, the slave was to enter in and say to the king in a loud voice, "Philip, remember that you must die." Every day, the slave's duty was to say this to the king every day, every morning, and no matter what the king was doing. Can you imagine that? A slave saying to the king, "Remember, you must die. You, king, I'm a slave. I'm telling you, remember, you must die." A slave of the ruler of Macedon daily to his royal master. Is it important for us to remember that? Is death important? Oh, maybe. Why do you think why do you think people are worried about death or are fearful of it? Yes, no one really cares about the death so much as what comes after it, right? Is death the end? Is there more beyond death? There was a poet named Lowell, and he wrote, "Life is a sheet of paper white, whereon each one of us may write his line or two, and then comes night." There are many false concepts of death, and the hereafter have created widespread doubt and despair. The insecurity of life is matched by the insecurity of death. I'm sure you guys did some study of ancient history, right? Or you're familiar with at least ancient Egyptian culture. You know, what were they famous for doing with their dead? It was a whole process, right? Especially the wealthy did, the pharaohs, they're the ones most people know about. But when they died, what did the Egyptians believe? What happened to the... They weren't dead, right? Right. Yep. Yep. So yeah, there's a lot more in depth if you want to study it, but basically, yeah, death was just a transition to a new life, and so quite often the pharaohs, especially, you know, they were buried with all the goods that they thought they might need in the afterlife. You know, they might need. There was some pottery. You know, maybe you need some vases in the afterlife, right? You got somewhere to put your new flowers, set up your new apartment, right, in the afterlife. Some of them had jewelry, and as Auntie mentioned, you know, servants, live servants would go in, you know, to serve this dead person. And the whole mummification process was very intricate, right? You know, the taking out of the organs and the embalming process. It was all very for lack of a word, intricate, right? Because they believed that unless this process was carried out in the correct manner, then this person who died would not enter into the afterlife. In fact, if they did it wrong, they would enter into another place, afterlife, but which was bad. It was like a damnation, like a hell, so to speak. And so there was this whole process, right, of what they would do concerning their dead. Another culture, Vikings also had a similar belief. They believed that if you died a brave death, if you were brave, maybe dying in battle, then the Valkyries, these angels, would carry you into the halls of Valhalla, and their god Odin would welcome them into this new place, and they would feast every night. And you can imagine, wouldn't it be a great time? Every night's a feast in your honor. And so they were also buried. They believed that they were, their loved ones, when they died, they would bury them with goods that they believed they might need in the afterlife. So they would bury them with food. So they'll put them in their ship, and their ship would be filled with food and sometimes animals, sometimes like the pharaohs that had servants live. They would go with them, and they would have of course, their weapons and armory, because you got to fight. Don't know who you have to fight in the afterlife, right? So they had all these things, and throughout the course of human history, if you can look in other cultures, I'm sure, also have similar beliefs regarding death, right, and the afterlife. And because of these varying beliefs, the concept of death has had a mystifying effect on those who try to understand it. And so this morning we just want to have a little look at death. What is it, right? We want to look at its reality, its nature, and ultimately the promise of life after death. That's for later, but so first let's look at the reality of death. In his book, A View from the Hearse, Joseph Bailey writes about the personal tragedies he has suffered. His son died of leukemia just before his 5th birthday, and there were 9 nightmarish months between his son's diagnosis and death. And he wrote, "Everything changes. Death is changeless. The door of the hearse is never closed. Dairy farmer and sales executive live in death's shadow, with Nobel Prize winner and prostitute, infant, teen, old man. The hearse stands waiting for the surgeon who transplants a heart, as well as the hopeful recipient, for the funeral director, as well as the corpse. Death spares no one." That's true, right? No matter who you are, no matter what your social standing, death comes for us all. Death does not consent to let itself be forgotten, even though one of Tolstoy's characters declared that the essential thing when we are speaking of death consists in not thinking about it. And that's true, right? Lots of us, we try to ignore death. We don't want to think about it. You hear those terms, YOLO, you only live once. Because they don't want to think about the consequence, which might be death, right? They say, death, nah, whatever. We only have one life, so let's just live it. And they try to ignore this constant, which is death. But it cannot be ignored. Notwithstanding, death walks at our side and is indifferent to race, age, financial status, social status, and eventually comes to all. And the Bible confirms its reality, right? Paul writes in Romans 5:12, there it reads, "Therefore, just as through one man's sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned." Earlier, Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 9 verse 5, "For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." Ezekiel also says in 18 verse 4, "Behold, all souls are mine. The soul of the Father as well as the soul of the Son is mine. The soul who sins shall die." And then Paul declares in Hebrews 9:27, "And as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment, People are destined to die. And if we see in the Bible that death is a certainty, then who can escape it? Can any of us escape this certainty of death? What happens when we die? Let's look at the nature of death then. The Genesis account of creation is what? What do we read? Someone look up Genesis 2 verse 7 and Genesis 3 verse 19. Yep. Yep. And someone read Genesis 3:19. So what are we, essentially? We're dust. We are dust of the ground. So the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and at death, what happens? The dust returns. The dust returns to the ground it came from. We are dust. So according to chemical scientists, this dust, beside other things, it falls into a chemical form. So just to give you some example, I guess, the carbon that makes up our body, there's enough carbon to make 9,000 pencils. There's enough phosphorus to make 2,200 match heads. So the top of the match, the bit that sparks up, that's made of phosphorus, and there's enough in our body to make 2,200 of those. There's about a bucket full of lime, a quarter pound of sulfur, it's about 113 grams, a spoonful of magnesium, and there's enough iron to make a 2-inch nail. That's what you are. You are 9,000 pencils, 2,200 match heads, 1 bucket full of lime, a quarter pound of sulfur, a spoonful of magnesium, and a 2-inch nail of iron. That's who we are. Doesn't it make you feel? How do you feel about that? That's all we are made up of, dust. Isn't it? I don't know what you think about it, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. Right. If you gathered 9,000 pencils and all the ingredients there and you mix it together, it doesn't automatically make a human being, right? It doesn't equal life. But when we break down, when we become dust, just something to think about the reality of what we're made of, right? The, I guess, insignificance of our being. Death is the opposite to life. By it and from it comes no good thing. No consciousness, no intelligence, no communication either with or between God or man. This sad reality is validated by 4 explicit biblical facts related to the state of man in the realm of the dead. So number 1, we find it in Psalms 146, verse 4. It reads, "His breath goeth forth, he returneth to his earth. In that very day, his thoughts perish." So what happens to man at death, according to this text? No more thinking. Once you die, there's no more thoughts. The next we find in Ecclesiastes 9, verse 5 to 6. It reads, can someone look up Ecclesiastes 9, verse 5 to 6?
die, for the dead know nothing, and they no longer have any knowledge. For the memory of them is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hatred, and their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in this age in anything that is done under the sun.
So what's the second point then from the text? Have you forgotten? They no longer have any part in this earth, right? What does it say? They have no longer have any part in anything done under the sun. So that puts to rest, the theory of ghosts hanging around, people who died hanging around afterwards, right? What does it say? The dead have no longer anything to do with anything done under the sun. Third, we find in Ecclesiastes 9 verse 10. Maybe you can read it, Leslie, since you're still there. Read it loud so everyone can hear.
Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom or thought where you are from.
So what's the third part? What can the dead do? Nothing at all. Not even just taking part in any earthly activity. They can't do anything. There's no working, no planning, no knowledge, no wisdom. And then fourth, we find in Psalms 115 verse 17, someone else look that up. So the final point is what? Silence from who? Or silent to who? They don't praise the Lord. There's no fellowship with God, right? Once you die, that's it. So when you look at this, when you compare the examples here of what death is compared to life, what is it? Complete opposite. Right? It's exactly the opposite of what life is. Life is thinking, life is activity, life is moving, life is fellowship with God. So death is the antithesis to life. Everything that is present in life is absent in death. Everything that makes a person human, personality, thought process, social life, free will, moral obligation, it ceases at the moment of death. But there is also an encouraging metaphor for death we find in the Bible, isn't there? In Psalms 13 verse 3, it says, "Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death." Job says in Job 14 verse 12, "So he lies down and does not rise till the heavens are no more. People will not awake or be roused from their sleep." Even Jesus describes death, the death of his friend Lazarus, as what? As a sleep, right? So then from the metaphor, we can conclude three realities. First, like sleep, death is a state of unconsciousness. When you sleep, do you know what's going on around you? Are you aware of your surroundings? No. Like sleep, death is temporary. When you go to sleep, what happens next? Hopefully you wake up, until maybe experience the other metaphor for sleep. So sleep is temporary, and so is death. And then finally, like sleep, as we said, it implies what? Awakening. When you go to sleep, you expect to wake up. So when the Bible talks about a sleep, then there must be an awakening. And that glorious awakening is what? The promise of life after death. So we have a promise. There was a famous English explorer in the 15th century. His name is Sir Walter Raleigh. And After his execution, they went through his belongings, and they found a poem showing his belief that death was but the close of a chapter, that in the day to come it too would be successfully conquered. And he wrote, "But from this earth, this grave, this dust, my God shall raise me up, I trust." Centuries later, the Apostle Paul asked a question in Acts 26 verse 8, and he reads, "Why should any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead?" Jesus answered that question with an assurance in Acts, there it is, John 5:28-29. You can read it yourself, but I'll read it here. It says, "Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done what is good will rise to live, and those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned." Doesn't that sound a lot simpler than the methods we saw used by the ancient Egyptians and the Vikings? Imagine if you had to do all that. You worked all your life, and then you also have to work for your afterlife. You have to prepare everything ready so that you can enter into life. But Jesus tells us here, those who have done what is what? Good will rise. Those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned. It's very simple, right? Centuries before, Job expresses confidence in life after death when he declared in Job 19 verse 25-27, he writes, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another." Doesn't that inspire confidence? He must have been so confident that there was life after, there was something after death, right? He continues talking about, the interval between death and resurrection. Job says, "All the days of my hard service I will wait for my renewal to come." That's Job 14:14. Even more, he tells us where he would be waiting. He says in Job 17 verse 13, "If I wait, the grave is mine house. I have made my bed in the darkness." It's very clear. Later in Daniel chapter 12 verse 2, he writes, "Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt." What a promise, eh? Life after death. Even if you're evil, there's still life after death, right? Not for very much long, but there's still life afterwards, right? But everyone must die. Death is reality for us all. But we have the hope and the promise that there is more after. The reality of death is an unwelcome disturber of life, and is not to be feared. Instead, it should be a summons for us to number our days, to maintain our faith in God, to live responsibly, and serve sacrificially. The nature of death is a disruptive disintegration of life, and yet in that dislocation of dust we are remembered by God, and angels guard the place where we rest until what? That trumpet sounds. Until the call to awaken is heard. The promise of life after death is a reminder that God is faithful, and that he fulfills his promise to seek and save that which is lost, soon to be realized in a restored creation, a glorious reunion with loved ones in a place where no one will ever say goodbye. We have this hope. Amen?